From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to another edition of Chicago Newsroom right here on Can TV. We're so glad you're joining us for another week where we sit and talk about all the important things that are happening in Chicago, or at least we pretend that we are. We'd like to try to be that way anyway. And we start today by winding the clock back about a month. Remember that jubilant press conference that was held in Springfield with the governor and all the leaders of the legislatures, and back in Chicago, Mayor Emanuel kind of jumping up and down on the sidelines because we had a stopgap tentative budget of some kind that was going to allow us to open the schools and make some pension payments to the teachers. And so lots of things were in play and everything was playing out rather well for a while. And then the next day, I guess we all started looking at this agreement, and that's when we discovered the small print on there that said that this $205 million that the mayor had been, Forrest Claypool and the mayor jumping up and down saying, we need parity, we need to have this money coming to the, well, they got it, except that it said no money until 2017, and then only if by January 1st, which is, I remind you, a few months from now, there is an agreement on pension reform. What is that? What does that mean? What is pension reform in this day and age? So the only guy to turn to for that is this guy, Fred Klonsky, who writes and authors the Fred Klonsky blog, a very, very cleverly named blog. It indicates exactly what it is. It's a blog written by Fred Klonsky, who has, I think it's one of those kind of go-to things. You got to check it out because it is an ongoing conversation about teachers, their relationship with the schools, and particular pensions and so forth. And Fred has written eloquently about these things.
Well, thank you.
Hi.
Good morning.
So what did you think when you first realized that this money was contingent upon pension reform?
Well, of course, the first question that any teacher, any public employee who is dependent on a public pension for their retirement asks is, what is that reform going to look like, and who's going to pay for it? Mm-hmm. And it wasn't exactly clear when that story broke exactly what it meant, and who was going to sit at the table to bargain or negotiate what the pension should look like, what pension reform would look like. Because in the way I look at it is that the really only real pension reform that the state of Illinois can and the city of Chicago can come up with is to figure out a way to raise enough revenue to pay what was promised to the employees of the city and the state. And that's been the problem.
You and the Supreme Court of the state of Illinois.
And it so happens that that all of the justices of the Illinois Supreme Court agree with me, and I'm assuming as a fellow pensioner with you, that we expect that the promise that was made to us when we were hired, when I was hired 35 years ago as a teacher, that contractual arrangement and that promise would be met. And so I was never quite sure when people talk about reforming this, even before the Supreme Court made their decision last May, a year ago May, exactly what could be reformed other than raising the money. The state has gone for decades without paying the contribution to it that they owed. So to jump to the end of the story here is that it turns out that this reform, this pension reform that they need an agreement upon, is just something that the legislature comes up with. It's whatever they can come up with. If the Democrats in the majority in the state legislature and the governor agree that Ken Davis should pay what's owed, then the city gets their $205 million. It doesn't have to be constitutional, because once it's challenged, it'll go to the courts, and they'll rule that if it diminishes or impairs what the benefits are, then they'll have to go back to the table again and figure it out. But the city will get their $200 million, which of course is not enough to meet the liability.
So this is news, breaking news. Put up the breaking news banner. So if the legislature decrees that this is pension reform, this thing we just passed, then the city gets its money.
In 2017.
In 2017. It wouldn't get it in next year if it went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme
unions aren't necessarily, I mean, they may go through the motions like they did, John Cullerton did back when they ended up passing Senate Bill 1, when Madigan's bill was the bill that was passed and the governor signed it. They may have the leaders of the unions sit down. The mayor, I think yesterday, said that they would sit down with the city unions and talk about what that, and it wouldn't impact, the mayor said, it wouldn't impact current retirees or current employees, only employees that were hired after January 1st of 2017. So the unions may in fact sit down at the table, but they're really not legally able to represent the retirees at a bargaining table. It's legislation that has to be passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. And what that looks like, it can be anything, because whatever they pass, if it diminishes the pension in any way, it'll be challenged in court, and the court will rule, as they've always ruled, that you can't diminish the benefits.
And that's a really, it seems like such a bright line, but just a little bit east of that bright line, it gets kind of squishy about what diminishment means, because lots of things have been tried, right? They've all failed.
That's right.
But I mean, for example, can you strike a bargain with the not with the retirees, but the people who are currently in? I think for all effects and purposes, all these discussions don't affect people who are currently retired, right? Nobody's ever tried to change that. Am I right about that?
Well, they tried to do that. That was in the bill. That was in the bill that the unions, the We Are One coalition of state unions, and John Cullerton tried to get passed as a less terrible bill than Senate Bill 1. It was Senate Bill 2404. And that did cut the COLA benefits, the cost of living adjustment benefits of current retirees. It was kind of a poison pill, because it's pretty clear that the courts would protect current employees, current retirees from any diminishment. It really is an interesting question, because in the recent weeks, there's been a legal debate between Eric Madeir, who was John Cullerton's and the senatorial Democrats' lawyer, especially on he was like their consigliere on pension issues, and Gino DeVito and John Fitzgerald, who were the attorneys. Gino DeVito argued, he's a former judge, and he argued on behalf of the unions and of the coalition, of the union coalition, employee coalition, before the Supreme Court. He made the oral argument. And in recent weeks, there's been a kind of this debate between the lawyers. And so Madeir's argument was that you could bargain a change in the contractual arrangement, as long as there is what you call consideration. That is, when you have a contract, you can, if you want to change the language of the contract, you have to offer at least something as good or better.
You got to put something on the table.
Right. Right. DeVito and Fitzgerald said that's true, except that it's a distinction without a difference was what they said, because they're not offering something equal or better. What they're actually offering are a choice between two diminishments. Cullerton and the others want employees, current employees, to choose between a freeze in their pensionable income or a cost of living adjustment after they retire. And in the opinion of DeVito and Fitzgerald, that's a choice between two diminishments.
Right.
So apparently the law would allow you to bargain something. Of course, who bargains on my behalf? Exactly. I'm not represented by any union. Right. I'm an individual, and what we think the law says is that pension protection clause applies to me as an individual, applies to you as an individual, not only as a class of people or a group of people, but it's my constitutional right
Yeah.
to receive that benefit.
And that's a very important point too. You are no longer represented by a union. So who speaks for you as a retiree or for any retiree? But any two entities or two people can enter into a contractual agreement with each other and then agree at some point to open that contract up and change it. I mean, that just stands to reason. But the real issue to me seems to be that we kind of have these there are these three categories. There's people who are past retirement age and are receiving their pensions. There's people who are in the workforce now and have been for however long and are somewhere between their first day of employment and the day they go on retirement. And then there's people coming up who will be joining after whatever tomorrow's date is, right? So the state or the government can, or whatever the entity is, can do anything it wants with the people just entering the system. They can create a completely separate contract for them, right? With anything it wants.
We think so because they've done it already.
Right.
So we know, you're right. So on the one hand, we know that current retirees are protected. The governor at one point thought that among current employees, that arrangement could be changed today.
Well, that's the question.
And the court, in their opinion, in May of 2015, said that that's not true. Mm-hmm. That employees are vested in the system from the day that they're hired, and that they're protected by the current arrangement from the day that they're hired.
This is the contract you signed when you joined the company.
That's
right?
So what the legislature did several years ago was that they did what you described. They said anyone hired in the state, any public employee hired in the state after January 1st of 2011 would be in have a separate contract. They would pay less, they would get less, far less, and they would have to work longer. It's going to be a problem. So now, they did that, and it wasn't challenged in court because it seemed as if it was a constitutional thing to do. Now what the mayor is proposing is essentially a third tier of city employees who, after January 1st of 2017, would be in a third pension arrangement. The problem with tier 2, and then if there's a tier 3, is that sometime in the next 10 years or so, when that first employee retires and is ready to collect their pension, that pension will be maybe less than what they would have received if they were in the Social Security system. And you know that none of us who are public employees and who pay into the different pension systems are able to collect Social Security. In fact, I worked for 20 years and all that money is reduced. I get
You mean outside of teaching?
Right, outside of teaching. I worked I worked in the private sector before I taught, and the money that I paid into Social Security before that time goes under a different formula, and
But you can still receive Social Security benefits on that employment.
I can collect Medicare, but
you can't
and
get
my
a
Social Security
check?
payment. I mean, I don't want to get
We're in the
details
weeds
of my
here.
own, but I get there's a formula, and the money that you would normally receive is reduced significantly. I think I get, I put it off until I'm 70, and I'll get $200 a month. So my only point is that at some point in the future, someone's going to retire and is going to apply that's in the tier 2.
Right.
And will apply, and the money they receive will not match
what Social Security would have given them if they had.
And that's against the law.
Yeah.
And so it's called safe harbor.
Right.
And so if the federal government says that the state is not meeting the safe harbor requirement, they're going to have to come up with money.
Yeah. I've never understood why it is that government employees and teachers were not in Social Security in the beginning. I don't know. Is that a long history lesson?
It was a choice. It's different states run it. I think it's 14 states have something similar to Illinois, and that if you're in a public pension system, some states you get. I think New York maybe they get more Social Security and less of a public. So it's kind of a mixed bag.
Well, I mean, again, we don't have time to go off onto this little cul-de-sac, but I mean, did it benefit the unions when those decisions were being made because they figured that their members would get more money if they
Well,
stayed outside of it?
if you're in the pension system,
Yeah.
and if you're a teacher from the time you first get your certification and go into a classroom, and then you're in the pension system for 34 years, you paid 9.5%. That's far more than you would pay in Social Security, and you receive it's invested money, and you get a return. But if you're someone who was in the private sector, at some point the federal government, the Congress passed a law that called it a windfall profit, and they said that you can't double dip. They called it double dipping, but really it's money I paid in and earned and is gone.
But so this is where it gets really sticky, because the world changes each and every day, demographically and economically, and we now are at a point where, I know the Illinois Policy Institute published this whole study where a teacher who's in the system for 30 years pays, I think, I'm just very round numbers, but pays in $200,000 and gets $2 million back if they live to be 75 years old or something. And that virtually 30%, I believe it is, or is it 40%? 40% of current Chicago Teachers Pension Fund retirees are under 60. 40% of them. So that means that I, as a taxpayer, am going to be paying these teachers a lot of money for, I won't be around, but for many, 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 many years, which is different from when the system was, just demographically, it's different than it was 30 or 40 or 50 years ago when people were retired for 4 or 5 years, right? You and I are retired guys who are living really quite nice lives.
I plan to collect, and my plan is to go to at least 95, so I probably will do better than the IPI, and I'm planning to really get them angry, collect as much as I can. But look, the problem, it's kind of hard to argue.
And also one other thing, and you know very well that 61% of the people watching this right now are jumping up and down on their sofas and saying, I had a pension once too, but they took it away from me and they gave me a crappy little 401k that's worth $20,000.
And that's the problem.
Why? Oh,
well, that's the problem with the IPI and all the corporate think tanks and the way they frame the conversation about retirement income. To me, what's the real situation is that we live in a system in which a decent retirement and a amount of money to live a good life in your later years is somehow perceived as a scam. And that, I mean, the question I have is, why doesn't everyone in America, why isn't everyone guaranteed a comfortable life when they turn 65 or turn 60? And that's the heart of the problem. The lens in which they look at the world we live in is one of profit and loss. It's not one of what's decent and fair and represents a sense of social justice and social responsibility. And so to get into a debate with someone from the IPI over the fact that some people, because that was the contract and the arrangement they made when they began their professional life, was something that was right and just and really shouldn't be reserved just for them, but should be reserved for any person who works in this society. And the problem isn't that we pay old people too much. The problem is that we pay old people, we give them too little. And
most of them.
Well, certainly the 1%, the 1% don't have to worry about what their later years are like. But for most working people, we do. But
will you concede, and this is something that I have a real struggle with, will you concede that as we live longer, and it's more than just living longer, the quality of our health is greater, and a 67, 68, 69, 70-year-old person today is way healthier and has way more prospect for living.
That's a terrible thing, isn't it?
No, wait. Now, I'm just saying that it's much greater than it was even 20 years ago, let alone 50 or 60 or 70 years ago. So don't we have to adjust the trigger dates on these things accordingly?
Well, I think...
Is it right for a city employee, and I was a city employee, is it right for a city employee to start working for the city at 23 years old and work for 30 years and retire at 53 and get full benefits from 53 years of age?
Absolutely. Because after all,
see, I don't see
if
that.
they don't, here's the problem that's going to happen, is that if you require, just aside from the question of what's a humane society, if you require you and me to hold on to our jobs until we're 67 or 70 or 75,
we're screwing up everybody else.
We don't live in a vacuum. There's someone who wants our job and is waiting to start their career. And
don't you hear all those little voices from all the millennials saying, when are you going to die?
No, here's the voices I hear from the millennials, is that I was talking to a kid of a friend, a longtime friend. I knew him since he was born, really. And he's teaching in Detroit now. And he says, I love your blog, Klonsky. He says, except when you write about pensions. And then my eyes glaze over, and what do I care about? So that's what the millennials' response to this is. Pensions, they're not into it.
I don't want to get too deep into this. We have only a couple of minutes left, but I worked technically for a few years for the Board of Education because I was hired on at WBEZ in 1979, and it was owned by the Board of Education. And at some point, one of the people on the staff, the administrative staff, came over to me and said, we have to take you downstairs to meet the pension people because you have to sign up for your pension. I was 30 at the time. And they couldn't stop me from laughing. I said, A, I'm not going to retire from this place, and B, if I do ever reach 65 years old, I don't even know if I will. It seems so impossible to me. But 35 years from now, they'll just be paying me for my opinion. I'm not going to need a pension. And of course, I was wrong on all those accounts.
That's right.
So that's the folly of youth. Okay, so let's talk about your friend Rahm Emanuel. Okay. He seems to me to have been, I don't know if he's seen the light, but he seems to be doing a little bit better on these things. After coming in like a pit bull and saying, we're going to kill this off and this and this and this, after one defeat after another, he seems to have kind of begun the process of putting some of these pensions in order. He said the other day, Monday, I think it was at the City Club, that 3 of the 4 city pensions, that does not include the teachers, but the police, the fire, the laborers, are now on a path to sustainable income. They have dedicated tax money coming into them, which is what we've all argued for a long time. The municipal employees is much bigger, and it's going to be trickier. And now he's talking about, taxing water and sewer. But this is not the Rahm Emanuel of 4 years ago, is it?
Oh, I think it's exactly the Rahm Emanuel. Listen, to get into the money side, I would say I'm a K-5 art. I'm a retired K-5 art teacher who never, in his wildest dreams, thought he would be spending his retirement years talking about pensions and finance and taxation. So here I am. But I'm not smart enough to know it. And you've had, I know you've had like Amanda Cass, other people from the Center for Budget and Tax. I mean, they can go into whether this is actually it makes any sense
whether
as a
really
plan system. I can't do that.
Yeah.
But here's what I do know is that you and I both, well, if you live in the city, then you received your tax bill.
I did.
I'm paying 30% more this year than I did in
I'm not, because I guess I'm not in the quadrennial.
Well, so I got reassessed, plus I'm going to get the 12% tax increase. He's going to hit me now with a 28% increase in my water bill.
Water and sewer.
All of these taxes are regressive taxes. My wife warned me this morning to explain. Be sure to say, don't just say regressive, because no one knows what that means. But what it means is that whether you're rich or you're poor, you're paying the same amount of money. So
and if you're poor, it hits you a lot harder than if you're rich.
And all of these taxes that the city has placed on to pay for these things. This is why the person who's not in the pension system is going to get ticked off, is because the system is as they say, as Donald Trump would say these days, the system is rigged, and the Bernie people say the system. But here the system is rigged. It's rigged so where if the Pritzkers and the Zells and Griffins and all those people are paying the same tax rate that working families are paying, then the system is rigged. And don't forget that public employees, city employees, are taxpayers too.
Oh yeah, and
so
spend money
so
in
when
the
their
city
property tax goes up and when their utility taxes go up, they're essentially not only paying into the pension system through their contribution, but now they're paying to pay off what the city never paid for 10 or 15 years by additional. So they're paying the freight on their own pension.
We're in this horrible situation where we're at our last 2 minutes, so we got to cover a bunch of stuff in 2 minutes.
Yes.
The city currently pays 7% of the 9% that the teachers, that's supposed to be the teachers' contribution.
That's right.
City pays it. Is it reasonable for that number to come down?
Look, to me, this is a question for collective. That's why we have collective bargaining. So,
I'm just asking Fred.
what do I think is right? This goes on. I'll tell you, 50% of the school districts in the state of Illinois, who elect their own school boards, while the city does not, but 50%, somewhere around 50% of the school boards in the state pick up a share of the pension contribution as part of their negotiations. It's compensation. So those districts that do it means that the teacher gets less direct compensation, less salary, and in lieu of that salary, the district will pay, because they already pay some contribution, so they'll pick up the teacher's share. And that's what happened with the original negotiations with CTU and the board. In lieu of salary, instead of salary, the board said, we'll pay 7% of your 9% contribution. So if in the course of negotiations the teachers get something else in exchange, I mean that's what bargaining is, then it's fair. If they don't, then it's a ripoff. Then essentially the board is doing is saying, give us back the money that we agreed to 10 years ago.
What can we do? We've run out of time. Let's just ask. You were a Bernieite, I think, weren't you?
I supported Sanders. Yeah.
Are you among the people who is going to switch over to Hillary?
Absolutely not. No. I encourage everyone to vote against Trump. That I think he's clearly a dangerous fellow, and I hope for the largest turnout and the biggest numbers against him.
All right. Well, we'll have to ask another time how you get that without voting for Hillary. I haven't figured that one out.
I'm voting for Hillary. I mean, that's not.
You are?
Oh, sure.
Oh, you are. I thought you were going to say you were not voting for her.
No.
Okay.
No, but I think anyone whatever you vote for, as long as it ain't Trump, and vote.
All right. Thank you very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Another show, another half hour of your time, I hope, spent profitably here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis. We'll be back next week with another program. Thanks to Fred Klonsky of Fred Klonsky blog for coming here and straightening things out for us. And we'll be back next week. Don't forget, you can go to this address at any time to watch this and other shows at your leisure. Thanks. Bye.